welcome to another episode of Quest4Truth. I'm very excited to be with my co-host, Rob Skiba, and we are in a quest for truth, aren't we, Rob?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are because, nobody has a corner on the truth. We read the Bible, which is the truth, and it's our desire to know that with all of our heart. And so we continue to look at the scriptures, and we want to come at it with fresh eyes. That's what we're trying to do, and I think that's so important that we always come to the scriptures with fresh eyes. Because the moment we say, no, I completely understand that passage, completely understand it, is when we get in trouble. It's not that we can't, have a good understanding of lots of passages. I think I have a pretty good understanding of a lot of passages, but I certainly don't have a complete understanding of all the passages, because there's always more. There's always another nugget that we can dig out. And so we are going through Revelation. We're in chapter 6. And last time we made it through all of 2 verses.
2 whole verses.
I know. So
just as a real quick tag along to the first 2 verses, when we were after we finished the show, I went back and looked. Let me put the screen share back on here for a second. But looking at what I was talking about with this CFR, we're talking about the white horse, and they have a dude on a white horse with it says everywhere in the Council for Foreign Relations. But I just noticed up here, also part of that whole family is the Trilateral Commission. And when you look at the Trilateral Commission's logo, you got a 666 going on there. So, I don't know, but I do believe that we're talking about harbingers. And certainly these guys, one way or another, are setting the stage for what's coming next. And the next thing we see in Revelation 6, why don't we just go ahead and read verse 3?
Yeah.
Okay. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come and see." Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill to him a great sword. All right, I'll hand it over to you.
I think, as we've been talking about the seals, the picture that I used to have in my mind is that as a seal was being opened, so was the scroll. But now we've taken a look at ancient scrolls, and no matter how you slice it, really, the scroll is not being opened until all 7 seals are broken. But with each breaking of a seal, something happens on earth. So the question is, when does Jesus begin to break open the seals, right? And that's a tricky question.
Along those same lines, seal, and it says, and I heard a second living creature saying, "Come and see." So it's like he pops open a seal, and then this creature says to John, "Hey, come check this out." So it's like you got the lamb over here in the corner or wherever. John's not reading, okay, this is what happens, he's being pulled aside by a creature saying, okay, look at what's going on. Like, look at that monitor. It doesn't say come and read. It says come and see.
Right. Yeah, good point. Good point. So, again, the timing of this, it's just so hard to put our finger on it. And that could be for a reason that we're not able to put our finger on it. But whenever that seal is broken, this is what becomes visible. This is what you can notice at the breaking of that seal. Have these already broken? We don't know. Are these, maybe they have. I mean, maybe these have already happened in history, and that we are seeing, as we talked about last show, that these may have started 100 years ago, maybe 200 years ago. I mean, who knows? And that the stage is already set, but the Lord is beginning to open these seals so that He can reclaim planet Earth.
Yeah, I'll just come right out. Peeling of the third seal. That's where I think we are. The second one has way. Some people could point to the first 2 world wars, We've had anything but peace ever since then. I actually, again, going along the lines of these being harbingers I went with the premise of people on the horses. We have death, which is an entity, but I'm going with the premise. Be systems, it could be Vatican, whatever, with first seal and whatnot, or a House of Rothschild, central banking system, or whatever. Second seal, though, when it talked about a red horse, it had a rider who had the power to take peace from. I have to tell you, I really began to think that George W. Bush fit that rider quite well with his bogus war on terror. War is terror. So how do you wage terror to get rid of terror? I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. It seems to me that this great sword, it says war on terror on it, at least in my mind. Because when he made that declaration of a war on terror, he effectively forever. There will never be peace on this earth because it is not a war against a idea conjured up in a Luciferian's mind. It will never end. Every time you wage terror to try to get rid of terror, all you do is create more terrorists that create more terror. And it's only going to get worse. I mean, we're seeing it with ISIS over there in the Middle East right now. And so, I'm going with the premise that the first horse set the stage with then the second one sets the stage with perpetual warfare. And then we get into the third one, which, well, maybe I should pause here before we go into the third one, just kind of get your take on it. But that's my feeling on it, is that we are definitely into the second seal at the moment, and those are the reasons why I think that may be true.
Yeah, and just to recap from last show, I would take the position, not so much that the Antichrist is on the white horse, but an angelic being, a fallen angel, is on that white horse. And I think that particular fallen angel may be in charge of the Vatican papal system. The second one on this red horse, you think about the color red. Think about a system of governance or a system of philosophy of life that is epitomized by the color red. And we have to think of communism, right? We talk about red China. We have red, communism. Everything's red. I mean, there's got to be something about that. It's a very, very powerful color. That red is that. And so this angel, this fallen angel on this horse, could be the one who's, he's kind of like the prince of communism. And it's his job, in a very bad way, to spread that through the earth. And as we've looked at communism, true communism, not the good, feel-good stuff, but the reality of communism, there has been, war and nothing but war. And let's point out that Nazis are national socialists, right? They're, there's more of a fascist approach to things instead of a strict communist approach. But it's really the same thing when you start thinking about, of course, wars. Talk about taking peace from planet Earth. I mean, the last century certainly took peace from planet Earth, and boy, did they kill one another, right? In World War II, we had about 52 million people die. Stalin went out and butchered 60 million of his own people. Mao Zedong, he beat them all. He killed 80 million of his own people. And wherever communism has gone, it's been nothing but bloodshed. So, I think that's a pretty good candidate when we start thinking about taking peace from planet Earth and people killing one another. This great sword, well, talk about bloodshed, you really can't, nothing compares to what the effects, what communism has done on planet Earth.
Yeah, I'm gonna get myself in a lot of trouble. Certainly, red China, Russia, all that red, but here we go. You also have the red states in the election process. It represents the Republican Party. And going back to what I said about George W. Bush being the leader of the red state, Republican Party for 2 terms. Happened to start off his time in office sometime in the year 2000. They turned the stars of the elephant upside down, representing pentagrams. So, of course, Satan is also associated with the color red. So you got a bunch of Luciferian Republicans announcing a war on terror. And let me just say, this is not about, Republicans and Democrats, because I think they're both Luciferians, quite honestly. I think Judge Napolitano said it best, Republicans and Democrats are 2 wings of the same bird of prey.
Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? What if Democrats and Republicans were 2 wings of the same bird of prey? Tonight, what if elections don't matter? What if elections were actually useful tools for social control? What if they just provided the populace with meaningless participation in a process that validates an establishment that never meaningfully changes? What if that establishment doesn't want and doesn't have the consent of the governed? What if the 2-party system was actually a mechanism used to limit so-called public opinion?
One young girl traced them all back to one common ancestor.
They're all cousins and all grandsons of John Lackland.
It's the first family tree of its kind, pouring through more than 500,000 names for months. 12-year-old Bridge Ann D'Avignon discovered that all the U.S. presidents are related to the former King of England, John Lackland Plantagenet, signer of the Magna Carta in 1215.
In my book, there's a lot of genealogical research, going back, Dick's family, my family, these heroic and amazing tales of people who went west. But one of the things I discovered is that Dick and Barack Obama are 8th cousins. What? Is that an amazing thing? Yes, if you go back 8 generations, really? They have a common ancestor.
The Bush lineage has blood ties to a great number of former presidents. George Washington, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses Grant, Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, Grover Cleveland, Teddy Roosevelt, William Taft, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Franklin Roosevelt, Richard Nixon, and Gerald Ford. Michael Tessarion points out in his work that Bush is closely related to every European monarch on and off the throne, and has kinship with every member of Britain's royal family. Bush's family tree can be documented as far back as the early 15th century. He has a direct descent from Henry III and from Henry VIII's sister Mary Tudor. He is also descended from Charles II of England. And we also find that George W. Bush is a direct descendant of Godfrey the Bullion. Godfrey was the first king of Jerusalem after he recaptured it from the Saracens, which was the name for the Islamic faith during the Middle Ages. It is interesting to note that the current occupation of the United States in the Middle East was re-established by the same family, George Bush Sr. in 1991, and again by George Bush Jr. in 2003. George Bush Jr. is then found to be a cousin to both opposing candidates of his 2 terms in office, Al Gore and John Kerry. Democratic President Barack Obama also has blood ties with George W. Bush, as well as Gerald Ford, Lyndon Johnson, Harry Truman, James Madison, and the British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill.
Let me take you through this, branch by branch.
The 101st Airborne Division, air assault.
Vice President Dick Cheney, the man who's only a heartbeat away from the presidency, is actually a blood relation. He's President Bush's 9th cousin once removed. Cheney's cousin Barack Obama is also Bush's 11th cousin and the 9th cousin of Brad Pitt. But we're only just getting started. President Lincoln was President Bush's 7th cousin 5 times removed, and Bush shared more than just a ballot with John Kerry. That's right, they're 9th cousins twice removed. There's also royalty in the Bush bloodline. Princess Diana was Bush's 11th cousin twice removed. And then there's this bombshell. He's also related to Playboy founder Hugh Hefner, even Pocahontas, and Vlad the Impaler.
What if the whole purpose of the Democratic and Republican parties was not to expand voters' choices, but to limit them.
When 44 presidents are all related to each other and related to one guy, King John Lackland, signer of the Magna Carta, who created the Nephilim parade every year called the Lord Mayor Parade, where they march two huge giants of Gog and Magog around, also fits the bill. So while historically speaking, sure, the communists have been out there doing their thing, we're top dog right now, at least at the moment, and now we're doing our thing and causing lots of wars and rumors of wars under this bogus war on terror. So there could be a number of different ways of looking at the color red, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, and I'm not sure that I subscribe to the George Bush and red Republican thing, but I do think it's interesting. It is red. I'll grant you that. It is red. And I read a fantastic book by, let's see, the creature from Jekyll Island.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to think of the author's name. It's escaping me at the moment. G.Edward Griffin. There we go. G.Edward Griffin. Fantastic book. I mean, talk about eye-opening and jaw-dropping. You follow the money, right? Follow the money, and you discover that American business, let's call it Illuminati kind of business, had a lot to do with the establishment of red Russia and red China.
Absolutely.
And, so it all goes back. The thread does go back, and it takes you back to the Lord Rothschild plus Jacob Frank and Adam Weishaupt. So we go back to the beginning of the Illuminati, which goes back to Shabtai Tzvi. So it's all connected, right? It's all connected. But I would argue that the Second Horseman is a particular manifestation of that, right? It's a new chapter in the same book, right?
Well, and that's why I'm leaning on the it sounds like I'm picking on George W. Well, I am picking on George W. Bush, quite honestly, and I voted for the guy twice. So this is a recent thing. I mean, there has been wars and rumors of wars, and there has been the communist, murders and all of that stuff that took place. But to me, this war, all those other wars were, we had our world wars, but then we've had a lot of these local skirmishes going on everywhere. But when they created this war on terror, I mean, that's a war on everybody that they deem to be a terrorist, and they make up the definition. So the fact that you and I are talking the way we are right now probably just has me at least labeled on somebody's watch list. This is a game changer. It's a policy that has literally affected every single person on this planet, and in that sense, it's brand new, in my opinion. Yeah,
well, good points. I think we've kind of hashed out, what we think this horse could be. And again, just to stress that, we don't know ultimately. The text doesn't spell it out who this has to be. But
we're guessing here.
We are guessing, But in my opinion, I think the strongest candidate, look who has taken away peace and has killed, gazillions of people. That would be the last century. And communism is the common name to that. So, take it or leave it. At the moment, I mean,
I think the world has. Yeah. I think the world has yet to see what America is capable of doing. I mean, when you think of the fact that we have hundreds, probably thousands of military bases all over the planet right now, and we're sticking our nose in everything, it's truly frightening. Now, this is coming from a guy. Okay, I was in the Army for 8 years, third-generation Army guy. Most of the guys, at least that I was ever in contact with, are good, I wouldn't say godly people, but they were, for the most part, good, solid American pie type, God, country, family type people, good people. But unfortunately, they're victims too. They are the enforcement arm of the Illuminati right now. And they are being and a lot of these guys are taking a stand saying, you know what, I'm done. I'm not doing that anymore. And they're questioning their orders. And, a lot of these guys are getting in trouble for it, but I applaud them for it. I'm like, you know what? The wars that we're waging right now are not constitutional. So, if we actually have a system of law in this government, we're supposed to follow the Constitution. And people who are in the military swear an oath to defend the Constitution. So when our Luciferian leaders are going against the Constitution, well, now we have a big problem, because they also have to answer to the commander-in-chief, who's telling them where to go and what to do. So, if we are in fact the ones that are going to bring about the rise of Babylon, whether we are Babylon, as our friends G.Edward and Doug Krieger think, or whether we are setting up Babylon, as I think, either way, we are actively involved in what's going to be the last days New World Order. And the New World Order stuff starts here, and you can go back to the creature from Jekyll Island, and in fact, people can listen to the most downloaded show I've ever done on the Revolutionary Radio Project. Is a show I did with Tim Bentz, and he tells this amazing story about an experience he had on Jekyll Island, where he came to find out that the house where they conceived of the Federal Reserve, the living room where that was conceived, is sitting over a Canaanite blood altar of Nephilim giants.
And I'm just going to play a clip from that interview. This is what happened when he met this individual from the museum. At this time, when he first got there to Jekyll Island, he didn't know. He's like, Lord, why am I here? Why are you bringing me to Jekyll Island? And then he found out why the Lord brought him there.
He takes me back to the museum, and he said, we got a lot of stuff on the Indians. He said this was actually like the government main community for a tribe of Indians that don't exist anymore. That tribe was called the Timucas. He said the Jekyll Island Club was actually built on top of everything that the Indians had. So they just kind of wiped the village out and built the club on top of it. So wherever the chief's house was, there was a cottage now. Wherever the council house was, there was now the Jekyll Island Hotel. And he said everything that's built and visible today is actually sitting right on top of something that was significant in the Indian village when it existed. And so I said, well, let's look at the museum. I want to see some of the Indian stuff. So we're looking at arrowheads and spear tips. And he said, you want to see the bones? And I said, well, yeah. That sounds, don't get to see skeletons very often. I said, are they where we can actually see them, or are they buried? He said, no, they're visible. So they had a burial site that they had been very respectful for when they built the museum. When they found a burial site, they didn't move the bones. They left them where they were. And so I'm looking at 4 skeletons of the Timucua chiefs. And I realized, man, these guys are really tall. And I commented to the guy that, how tall are these guys? They look unusually large. And he said, yeah, they're all about 8 or 8.5 foot tall. He said all the Timucas were unusually tall, even the women. And he said, oh, by the way, I've got a painting that actually shows the Indians. I said, well, I'd like to see that painting then. So he pulls that out. I'm looking at it, and it shows the Indians and all their regalia, and they're dancing around and having some kind of a ceremony. And then I see an altar, and it looks a whole lot like the one that I had dealt with in the Middle East. And I'm looking at the picture, and I'm going, is this an altar? Is this stone like something they're sacrificing on? Because this guy's holding babies in his hands in this picture. He said, yeah, they're cutting those babies, they're hacking those babies up in that painting. And so when you look at the details, 2 of the shamans or chiefs are holding a baby up by the ankles, and they're whacking their heads off and spilling the blood on this altar. And I'm like, sir, I don't want to be disrespectful of your training and archaeological understanding and history, but I don't know of any native tribe that did what I'm seeing here, unless it was an act of war. And this is really, really unusual. And I've seen this type of scene with artifacts over in the Middle East. And I've seen weapons like this over in the Middle East. Well, he was quite interested in that because he loves Native American history, but he's starting to question, maybe I need to dig into this more. That was his comment. So I said, at that point, then I thought, I believe this is why I'm here. I needed to see this and hear about this. at this point, I'm not that concerned about the financial stuff anymore. I'm wanting to know where is this altar. And so I asked him. I said, "Can you take me to this altar?" He said, "I can take you to the altar, but you can't see it." And I said, "Why can't I see it? Is it buried?" He said, No, it's not buried, but it has a house built on top of it. I said, "Who would be crazy enough to build their house on top of a blood sacrifice altar?" And he said, "Well, Rockefeller was." So
Nice.
we go over there, and he's got the keys, though. So we go into the house, and he takes me into the parlor. He said, "You're standing right on top of the altar right now. This is the room that is built on top of it."
Now, this parlor, that's where those guys, J.P. Morgan and all those guys, actually conceived of the Federal Reserve, right? Right over that altar.
That's exactly right. It's the room that they were sitting in when they drew up the entire legislation and planned to pass it that became the Federal Reserve Act.
Wow.
So this was the conception of the Federal Reserve banking system, on the parlor sitting on top of a blood sacrifice altar.
You wonder why our banking system and our monetary system is so corrupt? It was literally conceived over a Canaanite blood altar. And Rockefeller put his house right on top of it, and the parlor where the whole thing was conceived of was right above the blood altar. The Federal Reserve. Talk about a creature from Jekyll Island. G.Edward Griffin, I don't think even knows about that. But his title for his book was appropriate for sure.
Just things to consider. But we are definitely on the forefront of what's going to be utter hell. And this was heartbreaking for me to discover. I mean, third generation Army guy. I was in the Boy Scouts. I mean, as American as they come. I love America, apple pie and all that stuff. But man, when you start looking into this stuff, you realize, as far as a country goes, as far as this nation goes, and the policies coming out of Washington D.C. go, we're on the wrong side of prophecy, and it's terrifying. And when I look at scriptures that say come out of Babylon, I got to tell you, man, I'm thinking about, okay, what's the route out of here? Because I think the worst is yet to come, and unfortunately we're on the head of the spear in that regard.
Yeah, I hear you. Identifying who's Babylon is a tricky thing, but yeah, I mean, again, a lot of this depends on when you think the second seal is going to be fulfilled. Sure. Whether it's been something that may have happened already, which I think you and I are in agreement on that, or if you take the somewhat more traditional, in some circles, traditional perspective that this is only going to happen once the Antichrist comes to power. Frankly, I don't think that of the 7-year treaty as being a relatively peaceful time on planet Earth. This is when they're talking about peace and safety. This is when they think that they have achieved their new world order. And sure, a few eggs have been cracked along the way to make their great omelet. But, hey, and this is all started. If you see, the thing is, the prophecy cannot be separated, can't be divorced from history. We have to go back and say, okay, this isn't happening in a vacuum. Satan isn't just going to, do everything in 7 years. I mean, 7 years is a very short time to accomplish things on a global scale. I mean, it takes time to get people moving, right? Just like a train, right? Once you get the train moving, okay, but it takes time to get that thing going because it's got a lot of mass. And the same with planet Earth. I mean, it takes a while to turn people in a different direction. You just don't do it overnight. It takes time to build up that momentum. Even in today's world where we see things happening so quickly. I mean, look at how everybody's on Facebook now. But that didn't happen overnight. I mean, they started back in 2005, 6 or 7, something like that. And now it's of course quite the rage. Everybody's on Facebook, but it's still it took some years for that to really catch on. But of course now you can't think of life without Facebook. But I mean, I'm not trying to give a commercial here for Facebook, but I mean, it's really become, it's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and but that's not how it was at the beginning. And so even in today's incredibly fast world, things still take time to get momentum. And so when you're talking about the whole planet, you want all these things to happen. It just takes time. So anyway, I think we can move on from the second horse. And
that's why I think. Well, I mean, everybody hates to hear this, but I think I believe we have at least 19 more years to go. For the reason you just stated. I mean, there's still a lot. I mean, things are happening quicker now. A lot of the foundation has already been laid in the last 200 years or so, and we're going to start seeing things happening in rapid succession, I think, from this point forward. But I do believe there's still quite a bit left that has to happen. I mean, and a really good catalyst could certainly make those things fall into place even quicker. So I don't rule that out. But I think you and I, at least at this point, are in agreement that we're in the second seal. And I guess the question is, when's the third seal going to happen? So maybe we should pick up on verse 5.
Good, sounds good. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." Well, if we go along with how I'm seeing things, if the white horse is essentially the Vatican papal system, maybe the Black Pope, something like that. The second one is the communist economic system. Then the third, presumably, would be some form of capitalism or Western economic system. And we certainly have, we got this black horse. You're in the black, right? And we talk about, I mean, that may be a stretch, but you do have this pair of scales in his hand, so there's some kind of commerce that's going on, some kind of a market, it would appear. And of course, we have this quart of wheat. Now, obviously, the quart of wheat is going for an incredible price, 1 day's wage, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wage. Denarius just means a dinar is what you can make in 1 day. But the oil and the wine are not harmed. So I don't know. What's your take on this, Rob?
Well, we're tracking similar thought processes, I think. My take on the first one, whether it's Rothschild or whatever, is definitely they're going forth to conquer with some sort of, I believe it's linked to the banking system. It's the establishment of the harbinger that sets up the global dependence on a certain financial model. Then warfare, of course, always helps to make that work. So we've got that going on. And by the time the world has been broken down to a point where they're, they can be manipulated, we move into the third seal, which I do definitely see also being economic. Obviously, I mean, it's talking about the scales and it's talking about food and commerce and whatnot. I do find it very interesting that it mentions denarius, and as well as others do about my take on the dinar. After doing my research on what took place in Iraq in 2003, when the same players who set up the central banking system in the United States and the creature from Jekyll Island went in there, led by a 13-bank consortium led by J.P. Morgan Chase, goes into Iraq, topples their banking system, gets rid of the old Saddam Hussein dinars, and hires De La Rue, one of the most premier currency printers on the planet, to create a brand new system, a new dinar in Iraq, the new Iraqi dinar. In 2003, they devalued it to 3,000 dinar to $1 US. Now, before the devaluing, it was 322, $3.22 US for one of their dinars. They had one of the highest valued currencies on the planet, second, I believe, only to Kuwait. And it held at 322 for a while. I think it got as high as 4 something prior to that. It goes from one of the highest valued currencies on the planet to completely worthless monopoly money. But De La Rue prints it up with some of the most high-tech anti-counterfeit measures of any other currency on the entire planet. So you're like, okay, wait a minute. This is worse than monopoly money. 3,000 to 1, but it has the most high-tech anti-counterfeit measures of any other currency on the planet on the thing. So clearly something's going on there, and it has slowly appreciated in the background from 3,000 to 1 to it's now about 1,100 or so, thereabouts, to 1, just slowly appreciating in the background while all the other currencies on the planet are going crazy. Now, my theory is that, you know, you go back to the beginning of the dollar bill when they switched when the back of the dollar bill now has the Great Seal on it, and they switched it. It's got the boy, I don't have a dollar bill in front of me. I can't think of it right now. What's on the left now? The pyramid. The pyramid's on the left, and the eagle's on the right. Well,
Right,
if you take a 3D object, if you take a 3D object like the Great Seal and make it a 2D object, you would think the front of it would be on the left and the back of it would be on the right. But FDR said, nah, let's switch it. Well, I think they switched it because it's telling you a message. There's an encoded message there, and they got from that point forward, they got the whole world dependent on the U.S. dollar. I mean, it's the world reserve currency right now. Well, what better way? Get the whole world dependent on a currency and then engineer it to collapse like a phoenix. It goes down in ashes and something new comes out of it. And if my theory is true, then the same people are setting something up in Iraq where I believe the actual end times Babylon is. Isaiah 19 seems to be a slam dunk, in my opinion, for that view, that the end times Babylon is physically located in what we now call Iraq. Well, we're the ones responsible for making that happen, and I think this whole ISIS thing is very telling and very likely could bring us back over there. And if you look at the dinar, the front of it is all in Arabic and has, you know, Iraqi imagery on it, but the back of it's in English. So to me, that's very poetic. I think it's actually very telling that it's the United States that's backing Babylon in every way. And then when our currency and our system finally comes crashing down and everybody sees the writing on the wall that this is going to happen, well, when they get ready to create a new currency, what's it going to be? Well, Revelation's telling you right here it's going to be a denarius. Now, whether it's the Iraqi dinar, I don't know. But it seems like a very good candidate, and I'm watching the news and I'm watching what's going on with all this very carefully. It seems to fit. And you know, if it happens in the near future, then the rider on the black horse, not because of the color of his skin, but because of what's taking place, to me, Barack Hussein Obama fits the bill quite well. A lot of people think he's the Antichrist. I don't. I think he's a much better candidate for a facilitator at the very least for the rider on the black horse, who scales also represent justice, and he came in my opinion, as a usurper right from the beginning. So, and you had the crash in 2008 and all this stuff that's happened under his watch with regard to the global economy as a result of the crashing of the American dollar. That's why I say I believe we're on that seal is being peeled right now. That's sort of my view on it.
Yeah, you know, I think the idea that it has to do with the banks is I think that's, you know, quite right. Whether or not it's going to be the Iraqi dinar, well, you know, of course, we'll have to wait and see. I do think it's very interesting. I just wanted to say, you know, the fact that the currency has English on the back and Arabic on the front, that is not at all uncommon. I mean, we have a lot of,
sure,
you know, the Israeli shekel, I mean, that has, you know, it's in 2 languages because that way foreigners can use your money too. So,
well, we are the global empire, so.
Well, yeah, well, but the, you know, well, you know, but you know, the lingua franca of the world is English, and so that way, you know, people that don't know the language of that country can still use their money for whatever reason, whether it's America or not. It's just that's the language. So that's kind of a finer point to kind of split some hairs there, but just just wanted to mention that. Well, let's go on to the 4th one. When he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature saying, "Come and see." So I looked and behold a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to them over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. So this one, really, the word here in Greek is kloros, which means green. So it's a green horse, not the idea of a pale horse. I'm not sure why that was translated as such, but I mean, you know, like, you know, chlorophyll like the stuff that's in plants. That's always kind of cracked me up. Green plants are green because they have chlorophyll. Chlorophyll just means green stuff. So it's sometimes when you decode some of these scientific terms, it just means that they're green because they have green stuff in them. But here a green horse. When I think of the color green, I have to tell you, I think of Islam, right? Because green is the color of Islam. Don't believe me? Well, go to a Muslim country and you'll see green everywhere. That is their color. When I was in Israel, the Muslim quarter had lots and lots and lots of green because that is their official color. And I'm not just saying because they think it's nice for decorating. No, green is their color. You can go and check that out really on any website. That they'll tell you the color of Islam is green. So and of course you have over 1 billion people that subscribe to Islam. This has been happening for quite a long time. So I think that's a pretty good candidate. Again, it's not ironclad, this argument, but it's at least an argument that I think makes some pretty good sense in keeping with the tenor of course, that certainly is the that is the star of the day. What we see right now in Iraq with all the atrocities, the mass executions that are taking place. Could this be part of that? I think so.
I actually go a lot darker than that. Islam, no doubt, is definitely a global threat, and I understand all the arguments for it, and I can see all the arguments for it as valid. However, death right there is capitalized as a proper person, in English anyway. And Hades, that to me, that throws, I don't care about Islam at that point. I'm thinking about the bottomless pit being opened here, Hades, or maybe not the bottomless pit being Tartarus, the prison, but Hades. That's some pretty serious stuff here. To kind of tack on some Nephilim stuff on here, it makes me think. There are gates of Hades all throughout ancient literature, going as far back as the Sumerian literature. They actually describe 7 gates of Hades with entities that rule over them. So it's interesting to me that Yeshua used the plural, gates of Hades will not prevail. The Greeks always had stories of people going into the underworld. Egyptians, same thing. So could it be that through some sort of portal activity going on in the last days, CERN-like type stuff, they open up Pandora's box? I'm thinking on a much bigger scale than Islam in this regard. Death as being an actual entity, Hades as being a place, also potentially being a person. Hades is the brother of Zeus in Greek mythology. I would liken him to a 2nd or 3rd generation Nephilim. Power is given over them to kill, and they're out there doing their thing, and by the beasts of the earth. And that's an interesting word to me, therion, and maybe you could talk on this a little bit more, but I have a friend of mine who grew up in Greece, speaks Greek fluently, and I just asked him one day, he's got no dog in the hunt, theological or Nephilim or otherwise. I just said, hey, Peter, if I called you a therion, what would you be thinking? What would I be calling you? He said, well, that'd be like you calling me a werewolf or something. I said, really? Why is that? He said, well, it's like really brutal. It's something that's not quite right. It's a ferocious type of creature. And I thought, oh, okay, because it says the therion of the earth are coming after him. And I'm thinking, with all the transhumanism that's going on in the world right now, and they're blending species together, and it's my opinion that it was the blending of species in the first place, specifically animals and humans, that led to men having only evil continually in their heart and mind. And oddly enough, Hollywood seems to get it. I mean, they're depicting this stuff in the movies, and the Amazing Spider-Man is a perfect example, where the scientist is a good guy. He's missing his arm. He lost his arm at some point, and he wants to obviously, find a way to grow it back and help other people who are amputees, missing limbs or whatnot. So he starts out with good intention, but he's trying to figure out what is it about lizards you can chop their tails off and yet they grow back. So what causes limb regeneration? So he's experimenting chopping legs off of mice and whatnot and injecting lizard DNA, and most of them fail, but he finally gets a viable subject that works out. He says, great. So he injects himself, and sure enough, well, his arm grows back. But he has an unfortunate side effect. He becomes a Therion. He becomes this big, giant lizard monster that has only evil continually in his heart and mind. I'm going, man, Hollywood seems to get it. And as I saw this movie, I had your book, Corrupting the Image, sitting on my desk with Tom and Nita Horn's book, Forbidden Gates. And your book was on the left, and Nita Horn's book was on the right. And I looked down, and I thought to myself, wow, what if corrupting the image leads to opening forbidden gates that brings about the corruption of all flesh that leads to having only evil continually in your heart and mind in the creation of modern Nephilim? And so, if that's true, you ain't seen nothing yet. Forget Islam. Islam's going to, if I can use the word, pale in comparison to the picture that I'm seeing here.
Yeah, well, a good word, and I think what you're suggesting there, it squares very well with Revelation chapter 9, right? I mean, here we have Hades, the place actually being opened up. It's called the abyss, right? And Hades is another name for that place, but Hades is the one who rules that place, right? I mean, Hades is the ruler of the underworld. He's the ruler of the abyss. And in fact, we see that death and Hades are going to be cast into the lake of fire. So that would suggest that they're not just, kind of abstract ideas. Death, it's an abstract idea. I mean, it's a state of being, but it's not just an abstract idea personified, but it's actual person who does stuff, right, and thinks stuff. In this case, a very bad demon. In Revelation chapter 9, when we have the stars of heaven falling to the earth, incidentally, which happened in the previous chapter, chapter 8, we see that the great star that falls from heaven, aka Satan, he's going to be cast to the earth. See, this is why it's so important to understand the book of Revelation is not written chronologically, right? Because, and essentially, the 7 seals are the big picture, the bird's eye view of this whole thing, and then we put the details in there. So it's very, very much what we have in the Bible, right? We first get Genesis chapter 1. We get the bird's eye view of creation. Then we go back in and we hone in, we zoom in on what was happening on day 6, because that's what is of greater importance. The creation of the fish and the trees, and it's all interesting, but that's all background. That's backdrop, necessary, of course, to really talk about what God wants to tell you, which is the creation of Adam. And so in Revelation chapter 6, we're getting this bird's eye view of what's going to take place. And then throughout the rest of the book, we're getting deeper snapshots. We're zooming in to look at these things. And so in Revelation chapter 9, it says, and I saw a star fallen from heaven. He's not in the process. He's already fallen from heaven to the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. So this star that falls, this great star that falls from heaven, is the same star in Revelation chapter 12, where it says that the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the world. He and his angels are cast to the earth. In 12 verse 4, it says that the dragon took a third of the stars with his tail. So there again we see that stars are demons. The great star would be the greatest of them, which would be Satan. And then he goes and he opens the bottomless pit. And guess what comes out, Rob? Some really scary beasts, right? Some really scary creatures, which are these locusts that are not your average any kind of locust. To me, I mean, they're either purely demonic of some sort, or they're some kind of a hybrid. I think that's a possibility anyway. But, they go out and talk about bringing terror on mankind. Boy, did they do it. They certainly are able to to scare people, and this is of course when people want to die but they cannot. Death is escaping them, but then we have these horse creatures. You've made the argument that these may be centaurs of sorts. I think that's interesting. It's a real possibility, but they go out and they kill a third of mankind from what they do. So obviously there's a lot of death going on. It's very unpleasant, of course, but the idea that Revelation 6:8 could correspond to Revelation chapter 9, I think is a real possibility.
Yeah, at this stage of the game, it's pretty horrific. And at this point, here's the other thing that I'd like to point out is Paul says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. And I think the problem with standard eschatological models is it gets us pointing a finger at man. Well, they're the bad guys. No, they're the bad guys. No, they're the bad guys. Well, really, I think it's the bad guys or the Nephilim, the fallen angels, the demons. That's the bad guys. And at this point in this seal right here, I think that's where it becomes manifest. Is like, okay, here's the real battle, and this puts us fully in the prophetic fulfillment of Yeshua's prophecy in Matthew 24:37, where he says, as it was in the days of Noah, when there were all kinds of hybrids and crazy things going around who had only evil continually in their heart and mind, shredding people and tearing them apart. At that point, I think we're in the fulfillment of Yeshua's prophecy. Prior to that, you're talking about wars and rumors of wars and famines and earthquakes. When you get to this point, now you're talking about as it was in the days of Noah. I've made the statement before. I think we're in the very beginning process of creating these things right now, but we're not fully into that yet. But by this stage in the game, we certainly will be. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of something to disagree with you with, because we're supposed to be at odds with each other. we keep agreeing with each other, so I hope it keeps the show interesting. But I
think that's all we have time for actually tonight.
I know, and we'll have to get into the fifth seal next time. But just great stuff in here, and I think we were able to cover some good stuff, and we want to encourage people, keep reading, go back, read it again, and read it again. That's what we've had to do, and a lot of the things that we thought we knew, upon even closer inspection, and say, could it be this other way? And it turns out, there's some pretty good possibilities. I think as we go on through this chapter, it's going to get clearer and clearer. At least it does for me. It's been pretty hard to nail down exactly who these four horsemen are. We've given our best guess, but I think as we go on, I think the language only gets clearer and clearer, because we can then define the symbols from the text of the Bible, and that's when it makes it much easier.
Amen.
So, until next time, we just want to thank everyone for being here. Stay in the Word, stay in your quest for truth. God will show you if you ask Him, and it's so exciting. Until next time, God bless.